Well, hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I pray you're having a blessed week wherever you are. If you are new here, my name is Amaris, and this is That Refining Fire. As you have already seen by the title of this video, this week's testimony is about how God gave us a house. And this testimony in particular is such an eye-opening reminder to me of how God works in the background, even when we don't see it, even when we're going through hard seasons, even when things don't seem like they're working out. In fact, they feel like they're working against you. God is still moving, and he is still in control, and he is still a good God that is such a good provider, and his plans for us are good. And so a little bit of a backstory. When my husband and I got married, we lived with my parents for 3 years, and that was not planned. When we got married, we were expecting our first daughter together, and we already had a 6-year-old, and our living situation was strained. We were trying to start a new life together, living in a bedroom. And right off the bat, we were looking for houses. The market was still a buyer's market at the time. There were lots of cute little houses with a decent price tag on them. And so we were looking, and we had found this house that felt like it was a perfect little starter house. And I was already dreaming up of how I would do the nursery for our daughter. We had put an offer in on this house, and the offer had been accepted. We had done inspections, spent money on inspections on this house, and invited our family to see it. We even had family in from out of town that we took to see this house because everything was panning out and we felt like it was gonna work out. And embarrassingly, that house ended up falling through because our financial situation had changed drastically towards the middle of the process of buying that house. And so it was a very sad and frustrating time because I had always dreamt of setting up a nursery for my first child, and starting my married life, being able to make a home for my husband and myself and our children. And that dream felt like it was slipping out of our hands. And so we decided that we were going to just hunker down at my parents' house, and I was going to finish school, and my husband was going to work, and we were going to pay off as much debt as we could. And eventually we were able to start looking for houses again. The market had started to shift, but there were still some good houses in the price range that we had. I had finished school at this point, and I had started working. And so that had bettered our financial situation to the point where we knew we could start looking for houses again. And so we had started looking, and we had found a house that we had put an offer in on. And again, the offer was accepted. We were really excited, really happy, and we made it to 3 days from closing before I lost my job. And I was devastated. It had been 2 years of living with family, which was a great blessing, but again, stressful and never ideal to start your married life and to continue adding children to a single house with multiple families. And I remember being so depressed and so sad, and it was really hard because both the mortgage person that we were working with at the time and the realtor that we were working with at the time were trying to convince my husband and I to continue with closing and just try to find a job afterwards. They weren't going to change anything. They just wanted us to close. And I remember feeling like that was so horrible. For one, we could not have afforded that house unless I was able to find a job that was the equivalent to the one that I had lost. And we could have put ourselves in a really horrible situation financially. And so I'm so thankful that even though that was such a difficult situation, that we did not push forward and move forward with the buying of that house. But that did put us back into the position that we were in before, where we were needing a house and not having the financial means to be able to do that. And so more time passed. My husband's job and his employment improved, with between raises and things like that. And our debt paying off was very helpful in our financial situation. And we were finally able to start looking for houses again, except this time, the third time around that we were able to look for houses, the market was 100% a seller's market. And the houses that we were able to look at, our price range really hadn't changed, but the houses had. And we had 2 kids, and we needed to find something that was livable right away. But the price range that we were looking at, everything was just falling apart. It was falling apart, or it had, you have that list of desires in a home. You want 3 bedrooms, or you want a garage, or you want a basement. All of those things were things that we were looking for. But the houses that we were looking at were just in such poor condition. And you have this sinking feeling, are we going to be able to find a house? I had remembered the houses that we had nearly bought, a year or 2 prior, and they were nothing like the ones that we were looking at now in this price range. And houses were just being bought like that. We were working with a family friend who was a realtor. We had a really bad taste in our mouth of working with somebody that we didn't know, after they tried to convince us to buy a house after losing my job. And so we had found someone that we knew to work with, and looking at houses this third time around, it was just a whole different ball game. We looked at house after house after house after house after house. And I know that that's a normal story for so many people, but it was so difficult because our price range was solid. Like we couldn't and knew we could not move past what we knew we could afford. And what we could afford, there were just so many things that needed to be done to these houses in order to make them like even safe to live in. And so it was just this long process of just looking at house after house and having them like not work out for one reason or another. We did actually put a few offers in on a few different houses. A lot of them fell through. A couple of them were accepted, and we did inspections, spent money on inspections on those houses only to find out that they had like major foundation issues or things like that. And it was really starting to be taxing emotionally at this point. I was feeling so guilty for dragging this family friend through this process with us, for only having the budget that we had, for trying to, for being as particular as we were being, which as time went on, we were being less and less and less particular. Like there were things on our list that were just dropped. Okay, we don't need a garage anymore. Okay, maybe 2 bedrooms would work. We definitely don't need 2 toilets. 1 bathroom is fine. Things that we were hoping for in a house, and we were just dropping, they were just dropping like flies because we were just trying to find a house that was safe for our children to live in and would get us into the area that we wanted to be in. Our oldest daughter at the time, lived in another city for most of the time, and we wanted to be closer to her. So we were trying so hard to find a house that would put us closer to her. And so we not only were having our realtor, take us through all these houses, but she lived where we lived. And so we were having her do this commute in order to show us all of these houses. And so it was just becoming very frustrating and grueling. We would start the day with 5 or 6 houses that we were going to look at. And then by the time that my husband was off of work, 2 or 3 houses would have fallen off because they had gone pending. There would be, viewings that we would be in the house. I remember this happening one time where we were looking at a house and it went off the market while we were looking at it. And we had to leave. So it was difficult and it was really discouraging this time around. And I remember a particular day, I remember it so clearly. We had looked at, I think, 4 different houses. None of them were going to work out. And I just remember riding home, feeling so sad and feeling like the dream of us having a home was so far away. And I wouldn't even call it a prayer, but I have an open line of communication with the Lord. At all times, I will just start talking to the Lord just out of nowhere. I don't have to start every prayer with, Dear Heavenly Father. I just will begin talking to the Lord in my head. And so this is one of the times where I did that. And I just said, God, if we're going to have a house, you're just going to have to drop one into our laps that's never been put on the market in order for us to have a house. Because I don't see us being able to do this. I just don't see it happening. And, the thought came out and I went on with the rest of the evening and, life went on. We continued to look at houses and then we ended up finding this teeny tiny little house in the area that we were looking for. And we were like, okay, this is exactly where we want to be. This house has almost nothing from, the list of things that we were hoping for in a house, but it's also like $40,000 less than our budget for looking for houses. And so maybe we could just pay it off quickly or something like that. And it is livable. It needed a lot of updates. It had no basement. It had 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. I don't believe that it had a garage. And if it did, it was 1 car. But it had a teeny tiny little backyard. We were looking for something that had a little bit more space in the backyard. It was just a house. And I knew that it was just a house. And I knew that it felt at the time like we were forcing it, but saying, okay, we're just not going to do this anymore and we're going to wait a little bit longer, like that option felt worse to me than giving up all of those things that we were hoping for and wanting in a house. And it put us in the area that we wanted to be in. And so we put in an offer and the offer was accepted. So we started moving forward with this house and we started doing inspections. And while the inspection was being worked on this house, I got a phone call from my best friend and she said, "Are you guys still looking for houses?" And I said, yes, like without even hesitating. I was just like, yeah, we're still looking for houses. And she said that her neighbors that I knew from spending time with her neighbors from across the street were thinking about selling their rental house. And she told them that we were looking for houses and they said that they would be willing to show it to us before they put it on the market. And my jaw kind of dropped. And I can't remember whether it was the same day or the very next day, but it was very soon after that phone conversation that my husband and I were on our way here to look at this house. And I remember driving, like on the way here, driving by all of this farmland and remembering, like having the hope rekindled in our hearts about, those things that we were wanting. And I was like, wow, it's so pretty out here. And it made me excited. And so we pulled up in front of the house and there was an attached 2-car garage. And again, my hope just rekindled because wow, that was on my list. And when I first walked into the house, I began to notice things, even more things. On the way here, I noticed the beautiful farmland. When we pulled up, I saw the 2-car attached garage. And then we walked into the house and I just was like, whoa, this has everything that we were hoping for in-house, basically. They had done additions and updates to the house that we hadn't seen in other houses and that we wouldn't have been able to afford ourselves. They had done a living room addition on the back of the house. They had added a fireplace, which is something that I had always dreamed of having. The cabinets in the kitchen were solid oak and, nice cabinets that had a lot of potential. There were some updates that were needed to the house, but it had really good bones. It had 3 bedrooms, exactly what we were hoping for. It had 2 bathrooms, exactly what we were hoping for. It had an office in the basement, and not just a basement, which was a huge thing that we were hoping for, that we were not getting in the house that we were currently trying to buy in the other place that we were looking. It was a finished basement. And so it was like you had this whole other floor of space to use in your home, which was not something that we were finding in other houses. Like we were looking at houses that had basements and some that didn't have basements, but if it had a basement, then it was just a basement. It was like concrete floor and walls, like cement walls or brick walls, and then like that was it. And then we were lucky if there was like no water down there or like creepy things or cracks or whatever. And so it was a nice basement. And we looked out in the backyard, and the backyard is big because this is a corner house. And so it has one of the bigger lots in the neighborhood. And I could just already see our girls running around and playing and doing things back there. And not only did it have a garage, but it had a large shed in the back. It was just ticking off all of the boxes and then adding things that we didn't even think that we would get. But it's those things that you think in the back of your mind that you want, but you're like, that's unrealistic and it's okay if I don't have that. This house had those things. And so we were so grateful and astounded that the Lord literally dropped this house into our laps. And because we knew the people that were selling this house, they had already paid it off and they sold it to us for right inside of our budget. And keep in mind that just based on the market that we were in and the condition of the house, our friends could have asked for $40,000 to $60,000 more than what they sold it to us for. And the house was actually worth more, that they sold it to us within our price range. And God moved mountains. He did wonders. He gave us exactly what we needed. He had set this house apart. And if we had bought a house 2 years ago or a year ago, this house was still occupied and it was not available for us. And so he allowed things to happen for us to wait and hold off to be in the position where this house was available. And his timing is so perfect. His timing is so intentional. And he allowed us to have to wait. We had to wait for this house to be available, and then it became available, and then he gave it to us without it ever being put on the market. We never had to deal with that stress and bidding wars, because that was a huge thing too, is bidding wars. And he allowed us to surpass all of that and gave us this house. And then it wasn't even just that he gave us this house when he did, that he had protected us from buying other houses, but we didn't understand that God was not just protecting us in our past, but that he was providing for us in our future in this house. We didn't know this at the time, but our daughter that we were trying to get closer to, moved to this whole other area to be closer to, ended up attending a church that is really close to the house that we live in now. And so for 5 years, We were able to attend that same church with her because God put us in this house. And we had no idea back then that God would place not just us in this area, but bring our daughter to this area also. He provided so many years of chances for us to be able to see her more often, and not just see her more often, but amazing things happened to us during our time of attending that church together. I was prayed over for depression in that church. God delivered me from depression while I attended that church. God healed me of a physical issue, a hip issue that I had during the time that we attended that church. God blessed us so greatly in so many ways, but it just amazes me the things that God has given us since positioning us in this place instead of where we were trying to push ourselves into, the place that we thought that we needed to be. God just so clearly and intentionally placed us in this house to provide so many things for us, so many things that we didn't realize that we would benefit from by being in this location versus the other location that we were trying to be in. Because logically, it makes sense for us to go to the area that we were trying to be in, to be closer to our other daughter. It made sense logically for us to position ourselves there, but God knew that we needed to be here. He knew that eventually they would be here too. He knew that there would be medical issues that we would face in our family that would require us to be in this location. We are so much closer to the hospital that my daughter ended up being at for months, the hospital that she needed to be at. So instead of us being airlifted to this other hospital because we lived 40, 50 minutes away, we live so close to it now. It made the commute for my husband during that time of our lives so much easier. The church family that we have, the church that we go to now, is very close to this house, and we never would have made the connections or found this church if we were living where we tried to force ourselves into, in the house that we were trying to buy before this one became available. And that seems like it shouldn't really matter a whole lot. Like, there's lots of churches out there, but we know that God meant for us to be at this church. He knew that we needed to be in this area for this time in our lives because of the things that he was going to move us into. We have seen things that have been spoken over us and spoken over our lives fulfilled during our time in this church. So this is where God had called us to be. And if we were anywhere but here, who knows what our lives would have ended up. But because God knew, because God was in control, because God made a way, he was able to bless us with this house and protect us in our past and provide for us so greatly in our future. And every time that I'm discontent with this house, every time that I think about what I would change about this house and what I wish that I had, I remember the fact that God gave us this house and he gave it to us for a purpose. And I want to steward it well while I have it, because I don't know what God has in the future, but if I can't take care of what he's given me now, then why would he give us more in the future? Why would he give us anything else in the future if we can't learn to steward in the small? If we can't steward the first blessings that he gives us, we wouldn't be able to steward the next blessings that he gives us. And so he does test us in that, our stewarding ability. And so today I just want to thank the Lord for blessing us with this house and everything that he's given us since we've been here, everything he's done for us since we've been here, and just take a moment and reminisce and be so thankful. Because I remember walking into this house for the first time the day that we got our keys for this house and just being so grateful, so thankful. Moving from a bedroom into a whole house, like it was the most fun time. It was so fun. It was so exciting. And it felt like the most gigantic blessing. And it was just right here in my face what God had just done for us. And time passes, and those memories, those things become further away from you, but they're still our memories, and we have to recall them. We have to remind ourselves of the good things that God does for us. We have to remind ourselves of God's goodness. Our brains are so fickle. Our minds are so forgetful, and it is so important for us to continue to remind ourselves over and over and over and over and over again of the things that God has done for us. Don't lose sight. We can't lose sight of God's goodness. Even in the storm, and especially in the storm, is when we need to remember to remind ourselves of what God has done, because He is faithful, and He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And He will never stop being faithful. He will never stop being good. And when life rages, when the storm rages, we have to rest in that. We have to rest in that knowledge and just know that God is good. Just know that He's got it. Hand it to Him and know that He's got it. It's when we try to hold on to things ourselves. It's when we try to force ourselves into situations that we end up in places that God never intended for us to be in. And so we end up, suffering and not understanding, why we're going through certain things, but not realizing that oftentimes they're of our own making, because we're trying to force things and we're trying to do things of our own power. And so anyway, that is the testimony of how God gave us a house. And talking about this today blessed me, and I hope that it blessed you. And I will see you in the next one. Until then, bye.